people maybe that were waiting are on now. So again, thank you so much for coming to our Understanding Standards and Depth of Knowledge for grades 9 through 12. We really appreciate our New Hampshire Department of Education. They sponsor this series of webinars. So we are able to provide this to all interested people and recordings and all of the handouts because of them. So we thank them. Also, just a couple of logistics. Everybody is muted. We cannot see you. We can't hear you. If you have any questions, if you could please put them in the Q&A portion. We will monitor that particular area for any questions. We do have people sometimes trying to raise their hand, but it's hard to have people raise their hand during this type of webinar. So the Q&A portion is the best place for you to get your question looked at and possibly answered. So right now we're just going to get started. I am going to turn off my video for right now. Our next slide here, we have our friends from the New Hampshire Department of Education. We have Annie Wallace, who is your math person.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We're glad to be here.
And then we also have Jenny Cavallari, who is your ELA contact at the New Hampshire Department of Ed.
Hi, everybody. Looking forward to it.
Okay. I'm Heather Jenkins. You can read a little bit about me here. I work for Demonstrated Success. Again, we have a contract with the Department of Education to be able to bring you these webinars. So we're happy you're here today. Our agenda for today, we're going to start with knowing your standards and just talking about how to make sure that you're reading your standards correctly and where to find them. The next part will be a little bit of depth of knowledge and making sure that you understand the different depths of knowledge that students should have at each grade level and for specific standards, and then transferring to the classroom. And then we'll wrap up with any question and answer. One of the questions that we do get a lot is there going to be a certificate or access to this particular presentation? Yes, to both. You will get an email in about 24 hours that will have a link to all of the handouts that will be from this presentation, the actual presentation, and then where you can find the link to the recorded webinar. So you just be on the lookout for that. Sometimes it does go into your junk mail for some reason, so just make sure you're checking spam or junk mail. But for the most part, it comes right into your inbox, so you can be on the lookout for that tomorrow. Just to talk a little bit about what the standards are, we have a couple of different ways to look at standards. That first one is in life, we talk about what the expectations are that inform or shape work, right? So we talk about like architecture, architects, they have building codes, they have budgets, neighborhood, aesthetics, all of that stuff that they have to think about. But for us in schools, our academic standards are those same set of expectations for what students will learn. And as educators, we're guided by pretty much for our ELA and math is the New Hampshire, not the New Hampshire, but the Common Core, which is the national. And then we also, in the state of New Hampshire, look at the next generation science standards. So we need to make sure that we are specific about what we want students to learn. And so we're guided by those particular expectations. Why use them? Obviously, they provide us with a framework. And really, for us, we've sort of morphed from teaching to make sure that we have learning priorities, right? We want students to be able to make sure that they are learning specific skills at specific grade levels. They also help us to guide and design the curriculum and assessments that we're giving students, specifically at the high school level. It's kind of, we were just talking, Annie was saying that for high school, you have all of these standards all in one, and you have to kind of pick and choose the standards that you are really making sure you're focusing on for your specific course or class that you're teaching. So it is definitely needs to be make sure that you're looking at that when you're designing your courses, which high school teachers tend to be very good at to begin with. And they also The last thing is they help you ensure all students have access to the same learning goals and expectations. It's huge. If you're teaching the same class or section as somebody else, you want to make sure that your students have that same sort of learning and those same expectations being able to be met by each particular section of a course that you're doing. Again, for ELA and math, we're looking mostly at the Common Core, and for science, you're looking at the next generation science standards. Just for, I know you probably know this, but to make sure that everybody's on the same page of how you read the downloaded documents. So for ELA, you have what are called domains or reporting categories. And those are reading standards for literature, reading standards for informational text, there's writing, there's speaking and listening. So those are your ELA domains of learning. And then in addition to that, you also have literacy in history, social studies, science, and technical studies. You have the same types of standards that have to do with literacy in those areas. So you're looking at the domains or reporting categories as reading standards for literacy in those, and for science and technical subjects, and for literacy and social studies. This particular area of the standards, people are not always aware of. I know for science teachers, a lot of times you are looking at the, next generation science standards, but there are in those, in the ELA documents, there is a section for the reading standards for literacy for you as well. So just wanted to make sure you're all aware of those. For math standards, you have what are called conceptual categories. So these are your big categories of instruction. And then you also have within that the domains or reporting categories. So this is number and quantity. It's an overview. And then underneath that, your domain or reporting category would be the real number system, quantities, and so on and so forth. So you have sort of a level above your domains or reporting categories. And then for science standards, you have for your domains or reporting categories, physical, life, and earth space sciences. For ELA, as we start getting further down, we have what are called clusters of standards. So underneath each domain or reporting category, we now have clusters. So right now we're looking at reading standards for literature. And underneath that, we have clusters like key ideas and details and craft and structure. So those are what the gray areas are there. And then you also have underneath each cluster, individual standards that need to be met. A lot of times when we look at mapping curriculum, we map to a specific cluster of standards rather than one particular standard in general. Or if we're really trying to focus on something, we really try to work with clusters of standards and then know specifically what each standard is underneath that. Same thing with the literacy in history and social studies, science and technical studies. This happens to be science and technical studies, but the history and social studies is the same way. You have your clusters underneath that, which are key ideas and details and craft and structure. And then your standards underneath those clusters. For math, again, you have your specific domain, and then you have your clusters underneath that, right? So we have the real number system is my particular domain, and my cluster is the two that are listed in bold underneath there. And then for quantities, we have the bold text as well. Then you have your standards again listed underneath each one of those. For science, your clusters are really your topic areas or your disciplinary core ideas. So all of these happen to be your high school physical science topics or disciplinary core ideas. And then underneath each one of those, you have what are called performance expectations. So there's a lot of detailed information in each one of those particular topics.
So the purpose of these college and career readiness standards is to create an interdisciplinary literacy expectation for all student success. And when the team X amount of years ago went in to take a look at the Common Core to develop these new age standards, they really came up with 3 key shifts that they wanted to make in thinking about ELA. And the first one is around regular practice with complex text and academic language. Skills can't be considered mastered when they're only practiced in isolation. The standards, as they are written now, call for a staircase of increasing complexity of text students must read to be ready for college, career, and life. I think it's nice to think about the anchor standards in the sense that even though you're teaching high school, these same anchor standards have a through line straight down to kindergarten that kids have been practicing with increasing complexity over their entire school career in their reading and writing experience. So that's kind of an exciting way to think about the ELA progressions. They really require students to grow their vocabulary through a mix of conversation, direct instruction, and reading. And finally, something that you purposely won't really see is text names or strategies. So the ELA standards are meant to be mastery checkpoints, not the roadmaps for getting there. And how the instruction is really left to the districts and the teachers. The Common Core site does have some sample text. If you're poking around on there, you can see some alignment if you look for it, but mostly it is about using the standards to drive your instruction. The reading, writing, and speaking is grounded in evidence from texts, both literary and informational. Teachers must focus on students' ability to read carefully and grasp information, arguments, ideas, details based on evidence in a given text. The evidence from the text is a really key component to the Common Core standards as they're written. Students have to be able to analyze and synthesize what they're reading in order to present text-based evidence and claims, which they can then elaborate on. And historically, many teachers have put a real heavy emphasis on writing that's based on students' experience or opinions. And while there is definitely a place for that, that alone is not going to prepare students for the rigor of college or beyond. And finally, building knowledge through content-rich nonfiction, like we were saying, building a background of knowledge is essential for student success, and they really must constantly be immersed in reading and learning about the world around them, so they can be successful readers. Giving stage time to this nonfiction really ensures that students are developing a full range of skills, and it'll really shine a light on that evidence-based writing, giving them the ability to inform and persuade through their writing and speaking. Here you'll just see those anchor standards that I was talking about. So in reading and writing, the anchor standards show themselves through 10 standards broken up into those clusters. And you have this through line from kindergarten all the way to 12th grade. And it's really an exciting thing to watch kids grow on these skills, and they can really track their progress throughout their reading and writing. And so on the next slide, you'll just see the writing standards. And again, they're labeled and documented just by their strand, which for example would be W for writing, college and career readiness, and then the anchor standard number. And then on the next slide, you will see just a sample progression. So like we were saying, you can see this read closely to determine what the text says is carried through from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade with a little bit of tweaking, but driving towards that same mastery skill. And when you're looking at the grade level, or when you're looking at this progression in these standards, you can just see the grade level there tagged in the middle if you're trying to figure out which one aligns with which.
Okay, the K-12 math standards are focused and coherent. They are internationally benchmarked and built on research-based learning progressions. Content and rigor are very important throughout, and students should be able to understand and be able to do their mathematics. It's not just memorizing a set of steps to do certain types of problems. It's actually understanding and being able then to apply the concepts and skills. And math actually consists of two sets of standards, the standards of mathematical practice and then the grade level content standards, which are really K-8 and then high school. Here you can see in grades K-8 where grades or grade bands have certain areas they focus on, and then we get to high school where it's kind of like a big dumping ground. Here are all your standards, and depending on the pathway, whether it's the integrated pathway or the traditional pathway, and the types of courses you offer, that you then align your standards to what you want your students to learn and do. The progression coherence, there's a set of progression documents which are kept at the University of Arizona, and these were put together by the key writers of the math standards. And here you can see how they're trying to build that progression from grade 6 through high school in properties of geometric figures. So these documents can be very helpful in understanding the progressions, especially in high school where there's a little more freedom in putting together the courses and what standards may apply to what you're teaching. And knowing your standards, the Achieve the Core has put together documents of applicable prerequisites for post-secondary options. So as high school teachers, you're really getting your students to think about what are they going to do after high school? Are they going into the military? Are they applying for apprenticeships and internships? Are they thinking about a community college or technical certification or going on to a four-year college? So this document can help you build your pathways and support for your students. And in New Hampshire, we know that we're competency-based, and the high schools have been working on this for a while. So while we have the broad model competencies, we can also have examples of here's more course-aligned competency, and then the standards that align with it. So this example shows what may be found in an Algebra 1 or Integrated 1 course. And Achieve the Core has a wealth of supporting documents to support math teachers. And one of them is their interactive Coherence Map. And I'm going to turn this over to Heather to explain further.
Sounds good. Okay, so for the coherence map for high school, as soon as you choose high school, you've again got these broad areas of mathematics here. And then if I were to click on the number and quantity, it's going to bring me into those sort of domains or reporting categories for it. Once you're there, you can also then click on one of those domains and it will bring up what your specific standards are underneath that sort of area or cluster. Within that, you can then open that particular and look at the map. And this is an example of the map for this particular standard here. And what it does is it shows you, this is all the information that you need to know about this particular standard. It gives you a task, a solution, shows you progressions and other tasks here. But then it shows you which particular standards that it's coming from and where it's going to. So it's really nice to be able to kind of move through that coherence map and see exactly what is going on with a standard, where it comes from, what's happening with it. I love that it gives the examples. On this next page, I'm going to just open up this particular part a little bit more so you can see it. So at the top, we're looking at the real number system. We're looking at, this is a prerequisite for this particular skill. Here's some course information and frameworks that you could look at. Here's your example task that you would be able to use. And again, there's all these little drop-down menus so you can see a little bit more. It gives you the solution. And then I love this download example task. So you can actually download it onto your computer, onto your computer, print it out, do whatever you want to do with it. So it's got a lot of really great examples in here.
It's also, Heather, I just want to point out, it truly is an interactive map. So you can go in and just totally explore and see how a certain concept is developed over the grade levels.
Yeah, so if I'm just going to poke back just what Annie was talking about here. If I click on any of these, the map changes, right? So I'm looking now at this particular standard and it will give you where that one comes from, where it's going to. I have gotten lost in it for sure, but it's really, it's so comprehensive. Again, it's on the Achieve the Core website. It's right under, it's under math, under Coherence Map. So you should take a peek at it. It's really quite an amount of information that you can gather from it. Moving on here to our next generation science standards. Obviously for you, for science, for high school, you're very well aware of the NGSS site. This is just an additional site that you're probably aware of, but we just wanted to make sure you were, that is the nsta.org site. It has the next generation science standards on it, and they come up by topic. So as soon as I click on high school, I can see all of my life science, earth, space science, and physical science information here. All of these are actually links. So it will open up to another page on any of these blue areas. But if I were to choose, structure and function, what will come up from there is it will bring up a page that looks like this. And I know it's tiny, so I apologize, but I just wanted to give you an understanding of what's going to come up. And you're able to look at all the performance expectations here. Again, anything in blue is hyperlinked, so you can get back to that particular standard. It has the science and engineering practices. A lot of this is linked as well. The disciplinary core ideas and any cross-cutting concepts for that. Also, down towards the bottom of this page, which I don't have shown here, is a lot of information on just examples and types of activities that you can do. So again, if you haven't been on the nsta.org site, it's a really great site. Melissa White at the New Hampshire Department of Education pointed us in the direction of it, and I find it really easy to navigate. I'm not sure why I have such a hard time with the NGSS site, probably because I am not a true science teacher, but it for some reason, this really makes sense to me. So check it out. The next thing I wanted to show you and bring you to are for New Hampshire SAS. I know that you don't do a lot with New Hampshire SAS in high school, but for you science teachers, there are science modulars, and obviously in 11th grade, they do get tested in science. It is not just junior year teachers that are responsible for this. So all of you science teachers, make sure you know that this information is available. So we have what are called performance level descriptors on the New Hampshire SAS website. And what they are is they are in the resource area. They're rubrics that align to the NGSS standards for you. And they tell you what each level of proficiency would be for a specific science standard. Again, in younger grades, if you were looking at 8th grade, you could see ELA and math. But for high school, we have just the science for New Hampshire SAS. And this is what it looks like. The information here, we have all of the particular high school standards for physical science and life science, and then what what students are doing at each level of proficiency. I just find looking at it helps people just really start to make sure that what they're doing in your classrooms is lending itself to students understanding the specific information at this level of proficiency or this depth of knowledge. So it's just another way to look at your standards for science for high school. Also, there are New Hampshire SAS, what are called modular assessments or little benchmark assessments. They are available, they're free, and those are not a summative assessment like in 11th grade. So 9th, 10th, 11th, everybody can use them, even senior year you can use them. And they are just short periodic assessments, right, that are correlated with those summative questions that are on the science summative in 11th grade. All students get the same questions. They're based really, I say in the Common Core here, but it's really on the next generation science standards. And they are on those standard domains, so life science, physical science, and earth and space, but you can also line them up with the different topic areas. So they are topic area related. So you can match them up with your units. You can administer them anytime. And for you folks in high school, they're listed under 11th grade, but again, the 9th, 10th, and 11th grade teachers can use them at any grade level, and you can administer them or just show sample questions to your students. I feel for 11th grade science teachers, I will tell you, because it's a big burden to have this assessment at your grade level and feel like you're the only one sort of carrying that burden of it. So you 9th and 10th grade teachers know that they're available so that when the kids haven't had a New Hampshire SAS summative assessment since 8th grade, that they're not just looking at it again in 11th grade and then wondering what in the world's going on. So it will help them sort of take away some of those barriers of testing. And again, they're going to help you gain a deeper understanding of the standards and the depth of knowledge needed for students to be successful on that 11th grade science. It's traditionally not the best performing assessment for summative assessments, and it's a lot because they haven't seen that particular assessment for a number of years. So the more they can practice, the better. So these modular assessments are great for that. Also, when it comes to understanding and knowing your standards, the College Board site and SATs, really, we say SATs here because everybody's required to take the SAT, but there's also PSAT information available. They have the alignment of the standards. This is an example of the document here where you can see what specific standards are being tested on the SAT so that you know that you are preparing your students as much as possible for being successful and being able to kind of move on to the college level. I know that there's a little bit of talk out there. My daughter is actually a senior in high school right now, so the SAT is big buzzwords, and wondering if people are, if colleges and universities are going to continue requiring SAT scores. A lot of them are not right now because of the current situation with COVID and just the way that education has gone in this last year and a half. But I haven't heard that it's going to be going away forever. So this is a really great way to make sure that your students are ready for those college and career ready standards. And then this is just a little quick information with links to be able to some of the sites that we were just talking about right now, so that when you're digging in, you know where to go. For you, it's a little bit different. In high school, we tend to tell people, look at your current year, look at the year before you, and look at the year after you. But for you folks, it's a lot. You need to look at sort of everything around you. But if you know what obviously you have your courses that are mapped out, just make sure you know specifically where students are coming from and how far you need to get them along before they go to their next course or class in that particular area. I'm just going to pause there just to make sure that we are all set. I think that there have been some things in the chat, but I think it looks like Annie probably got everything there. Again, feel free to ask questions and we'll continue to check that and answer any questions we can for you. So moving on now to the depth of knowledge.
One of the common things with our standards is not just the content, but also the depth of knowledge. And it's important to know that the depth of knowledge, or DOK, is not about greater difficulty as you go up into the depth of knowledge. It's not about getting harder. It's about what is the cognitive rigor which it needs to be applied. So we got flexible thinking, seeing multiple possibilities and approaches or possible perspectives, especially if you're reading different documents or literature. And it's uncovering those multiple perspectives or approaches to a problem to understand the concepts deeply and then be able to apply them broadly or across multiple situations. So the depth of knowledge, it's important that we have those DOK 1s and 2s, because as we're starting to learn something, they seem difficult to do at first. And it's with practice that we start internalizing and be able to do them with fluency or without thinking. So practicing the routines makes them easier and more automatic, but the DOK level doesn't change. We just don't want to get stuck at DOK 1 or 2. We want to make sure our students can then really take that information and the skills that they've learned and apply them to more complex tasks. So it's similar to being on an athletic team. You practice all those skills first, such as dribbling, shooting, passing, or if you play an instrument, you're learning the scales and some number theory. And then you get to play in a game or play in an orchestra where you're really applying everything. So depth of knowledge is not a hierarchy. In reality, the tasks at lower DOK levels are preparing the students so then they can solve and explore more complex, more non-routine problems where that require reasoning and proof and really thinking about things to make the connections. It's a tool that can help strategically scaffold learning. So when you're introducing a new concept, you may want to bring them up to what are the basic recalls? What are the connections they're making to things they've already learned? And then bringing them further. It's not the number of steps that makes something more cognitively rigorous. It's the non-routine nature of how one step may lead to decisions, and about what other steps you may take or what other avenues you may explore to solve something.
So what does this look like in ELA? At a level 1 DOK, you may be requiring students to receive or recite facts or using simple skills. This might show itself as referencing an area of a text verbatim, using a dictionary to find word meanings, recognizing figurative language in a passage. At level 2, it's going to require both comprehension and additional processing of a text or a portion of a text. A level 2 DOK question might be somewhat similar to level 1. However, a closer understanding of the text is going to be needed, possibly through paraphrasing, like using context clues to identify the meaning of an unfamiliar word, predicting outcomes, identifying and summarizing major events in the story. At DOK 3, the students are starting to require a deep knowledge and understanding. This becomes the focus, really digesting what they're reading. And then they're encouraged to go beyond what is spelled out in the text. And kids might be asked to explain or connect ideas that they will need to support their thinking. This might be explaining how the author's purpose impacts a text, summarizing across multiple sources. And you'll see that in levels 3 and 4, that multiple sources or multiple text component. In a level 4 DOK, you're going to find your higher order thinking. So these are often extended writing activities that require students to take information again from at least one or multiple texts or passages and apply the information to a new task. They might be analyzing or synthesizing across those texts, examining or explaining their alternate perspectives, or describing common themes across the text. So on the next slide, we just want you to take 1 minute, just literally 1 minute, to try it out. So think of a book that you know very well. On the next slide, we're going to show the DOK alignment tool, which was created by Dr. Norman Webb, who is the founder of this concept. And I just want you to think about one level and write a question or task that goes along with that book that you have in mind. So take 1 minute and throw your questions in the chat when you get a chance. Kenny, you can head on to math whenever you're ready.
Okay, so math, the depth of knowledge. Robert Kaplinski has set out some nice matrices, and here's an example of the same problem, but looking at it from a DOK 1, 2, and 3 perspective. So we can see, just find the factors. Very simple, straightforward, routine problem. So that would be a DOK 1. And then we look at C, where now we want to find 3 different integers to put into the blank that will make the quadratic expression factorable. So we've upped the rigor in the thinking that students need to do. So that would be a DOK 2. And then A would be a DOK 3, where we've even upped the rigor even more by finding the largest and the smallest integers that will make the quadratic expression factorable. So here's an example of Robert Kaplinski's chart for Algebra 1 or Integrated 1. So he goes through several of the standards and gives you examples so you can see the difference between DOK 1, 2, and 3. The DOK 4 in math would be something like a performance task that may take more than 1 day to really work through and pull in the different information, and maybe work with other people to pull in what they know and work together to solve it. Then we have Bloom Meets the Webs with Karen Hess, who pulled together both the work from Bloom's taxonomy and Norman Webb's depth of knowledge and put them together in matrices so that you can kind of see where, when you're looking at specifically tasks or assignments that you may give it, where are you pulling in both that Bloom's taxonomy, that higher level thinking, along with the depth of knowledge that is needed to apply. And the next slide gives links to all of them so you can see that Karen Hess has gone beyond just math, science, and ELA and included other content areas, which is nice. And then here are some sites that can give you practice at different level types of thinking and to pull problems and tasks from or further information on.
Okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about transferring that knowledge into your classrooms. So this particular slide is applicable for all grade levels. This is John Hattie. He is sort of the king of making sure and understanding student engagement in classroom, in any classroom. And he says when teaching and learning are visible, there are greater likelihood of students reaching higher levels of achievement, right? So what that means is a lot, you know, just a few years ago, I feel like it's been a long time ago, but I guess it's really not. We all started talking about learning targets, like students need to be able to see a learning target in your classroom. It's very important for them to understand the purpose of what they're going to be learning. And that is definitely true. They do need to see that. But even more importantly, in some respects, is for them to understand what their part in that. What does that mean for them? What do they need to be doing to be able to know that they are learning what they need to do? So we need to make this information really visible and understandable to students in our classrooms. So with this visible learning, he realized and found that one of the highest impacts on a student's learning is to be clear about what we want them to learn. So there's our learning target, but also for them to understand their success criteria for that. So what does that mean for me? That's what I was talking about just a second ago, is how do they know that they're meeting that particular objective or that learning target? And that can be different in a lot of classrooms. So sometimes they're rubrics so that students can understand what it is. Sometimes it's specifically in high school, a lot of times it's our performance tests or, competency-based assessments where here's all the things that you're doing and putting together to be able to be successful, but making sure that students are totally understanding what they need to do to be able to be successful is really the key. Not just listing it, but really having them understand that.
Slides 52 and 53 are really just an example of what Heather was just talking about, having your learning targets, but then reframing them for kids so they understand that the ownership of that learning is on them. They need to have the onus for that learning, and you are the facilitator of that process. So taking your I can statements, and then on slide 53, helping kids be able to articulate, I know I am successful when I can. Make sure that they can identify what it is that they need to be able to do while you are making the plan for getting there.
So the same thing happens in math. So we can take the standard in Algebra 1 for multiplying a polynomial by a monomial. So I can combine and multiply polynomials using a variety of approaches, and I can simplify. And then I can take that statement, just as we did in ELA, next slide, and change it to, I know I am successful when I can. Not only does it help students take more ownership, but they can go down and say, okay, I can do this, but I'm still working on this. So hopefully that I know I am successful gets them to think about their own learning a little bit more. And here's an example how you can extend it from just writing the I can or success criteria on the board, but beyond talking about it in the classroom and using it as an exit ticket, we can also add it to problem sets or assignment sheets that we have within the classroom or for homework.
Great.
And then we can have student, this is an ELA one, so I'll let Jen talk about that.
Sorry, no, it was fine. You could have carried on. Slides 57 and 58 are going to be about checklists. So this is an example of a student checklist that I modeled off of one that Annie made, actually. And it is just an opportunity for you to keep a running record of what it is that you're doing in your class, making sure that, and in high school, maybe it's kids that are keeping track of this on their own. Have the standards been addressed? Have they been identified? Have they been mastered? Making sure that you're driving towards those end of year, and as far as high school is concerned, those end game college and career readiness standards, making sure that kids are prepared for college and beyond, and that all of their standards are being addressed.
And then here's an example of a math one. So basically here is a course competency. The state course competency just means that it was written at the state level, not at the school level. It's not a mandate. But here it is, so your students can see, or you can see where students are at and where they need to still work on, or where you need to help plan and build to scaffold their learning. And then transferring to the classroom and supporting student ownership. So we want to evaluate what we value, and we want to help students see where they're at and where they're going. And one of the major things we want to do is have students start valuing the learning and not just the grade that they get. So transferring to the classroom, some of the things that can help us are scope and sequencing maps, or curriculum mapping, assessment mapping, and then using universal design for learning, which helps us to ensure that we're meeting all students. So here's an example of scope and sequencing. Many of the textbooks or programs that you have will already have a scope and sequence created by the publisher. So this can be a good starting place for you, and then you can modify it to fit what your school or district is requiring or asking you to do. Using your past plan books can also help to guide and create scope and sequencing as you go through the school year. And then curriculum mapping is very similar to scope and sequencing, but it's usually a little more broad and doesn't contain as much detail as a scope and sequence might have. And then something else to consider is assessment mapping. So in the elementary grades or on a middle school team, this may be a little easier to do when you're going across all the tests and assessments that students may have. But in the high school, you have so many students taking so many different courses outside of the course that you're teaching, that looking at the big assessments within the school and what the expectations are may help. Where are you giving assessments? What are the crunch points for the students and for yourself? So, you know, as you go through a unit, is it ending right before the holiday or right after the holiday? So that may think you about how you may assess where they're at. And so, and it works with backwards design. So what is it that you want your students to learn? How are you going to assess that? And then how are you going to plan your lessons to bring that learning to the students? So assessment mapping goes beyond the classroom or the school too. So you have your own classroom assessments, you have the school or district assessments, and then you have state or national assessments. So our national assessment is the NAEP exams, if a school is chosen for that. And they serve different purposes. And so when we're looking at data, that's one of the things we truly want to look at is what is the purpose of the assessment being given, and are we using the data from that assessment appropriately? So I can't really take the NAEP exam and use that to inform just my classroom assessment with that particular set of students. I can look at it more in terms of how is my curriculum doing, and am I providing, or are we providing as a school what is needed to move them on to post-secondary options? Whereas my classroom assessments are going to really drive to those particular students I have in front of me at that moment. So we want to make sure we're planning and using our assessments to assure that the assessments are appropriate for the specific purpose. And this is where knowing your standards is very important. Are your assessments testing the standards or assessing the standards that you are providing for your students in their learning? We want to design or select assessments that align with this purpose, and we want to interpret and use the data appropriately so that we can move the students forward. We can re-examine our curriculum and say, are we meeting and doing what we want to do? And PLCs are a wonderful way to support collaboration and develop assessments, analyze the data, and plan the next steps in use of evidence. So effects of planning and using assessments. We want to use them appropriately and make sure that we're using good assessment strategies to inform the teaching and learning practices. So a formative assessment will have a different purpose than a summative assessment. We want to ensure we're using the right evidence for the right purposes. We want to improve our skills and our student skills in critiquing what they're learning and then ourselves in, did this assessment meet the needs or do I need to revise something? And it can also help us have a deeper knowledge and understanding of the current students and where they're at and where their understandings and misunderstandings are. And it can also help us make efficient and effective use about our district and state level assessments, as well as the curriculum we're using. And universal design for learning. This is a state initiative. And one of the most important things here is understanding that's an approach to pedagogy, curriculum, and assessment. It is grounded in learning sciences and neuroscience. And we want to transform the focus of our thinking from changing, how do we change our students to meet the classroom demands, to changing our curriculum and our teaching to meet the complexity and variability of the students we have in front of us. And it asks us to think about what are the learning experiences we're providing to our students, and are they meeting the differences within the classroom rather than just down the general middle of the road. CAST is a wonderful resource for learning more about the UDL. And here they help provide a graphic organizer to look at engagement, representation, and actions and expressions. So those are things that can help us as we think about what we are offering for our students for learning experiences. And then, as with any lesson, we want to think about UDL, and UDL does provide a big learning template, but something a little simpler is just thinking about, as we plan, what are our learning goals and objectives? How are we going to assess that our students have learned that or met that learning goal? And how will we get our students there? So these are some things that you can do for that.
Also, when talking about how we're transferring to the classroom, another site that is really helpful is the Lexile Quantile Hub. There are a lot of resources on this platform. It's online, it's for educators, parents, students, or whoever. I really look at it more from an educator lens. There are a lot of tools on there. This particular website is also paid for and sponsored by the New Hampshire DOE, so it's free for any New Hampshire educators. You just go on there and you choose New Hampshire, you put in a username and password, and you are in. Obviously, Lexile is reading, Quantile is math. I feel like maybe some high school teachers might know more about Quantile level. It's been a really sort of big topic of discussion in the lower grades, and showing basically where students are on mathematical concepts and skills for their particular grade level. They are measures on the grades 3 through 8 New Hampshire SAS summative assessments for math, and they do go right up through high school to be able to show you where students are at and what sort of skills they have. For Lexile tools, I just have a screenshot here of the different tools that you can use, how you're finding a book, the grade level charts. This is an interesting one, the Lexile career database. So it shows where students are and where they can go to. And it's just an interesting information about what the demands are for each type of career would be for where students would be for their reading levels. And then some word lists and things like that for Lexile. For Quantile tools, these are all of the tools that are math oriented. These, there's a lot of different skills, like there's a skills database. Again, there's that career database and the quantile measures manager. I really like this teacher assistant here. You can go in and you can put in a specific standard for the Common Core and New Hampshire, and it will show you all of the different skills that are prerequisite skills for it. It will show you what skills and how you can teach it at a current level, and it can also show you those transfer skills that would bring a student who has already got those skills, bring them to another level, and where they're going from there. And within that, you can click on each particular skill, and there's a whole bunch of different activities, and sometimes there's videos or just lesson ideas there. Not all lessons in there or activities are created equal, but it's just a really good sort of, it gives you a nice understanding, and it's a nice flow of what the skills are and what students may not have yet, and how you might be able to teach those skills to get students where they need to be. So that's in the teacher assistant area. Once you get this presentation, you can click right here. It's going to bring you right to the Lexile Quantile Hub. Or if you wanted to look at the New Hampshire DOE also has a Lexile Quantile measure area of their website, so that it gives you just a little bit more information about what those are. And so right now, I just want to open it up. If you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A or the chat, wherever you're going to put it. We have had somebody really trying to raise their hand quite a bit today. And again, the raise your hand feature does not really work very well in the webinar settings. So if you do have something that you really need answered, please put it in the chat or the Q&A that's on your little Zoom toolbar.
I want to say I've been enjoying reading the questions that people are coming up with for the ELA.
Yeah, I've been reading them as well. I will say you are our group that's given the most amount of information into the chat for those questions that Jenny was talking about earlier. So thank you. We appreciate it. It's hard to sit there in silence for too long. So I'm sorry we didn't read them, but the three I particularly have a really hard time with just silence. So thanks for putting those in.
Yeah, and I also wanted to let people know that because somebody had said how they really enjoy John Hattie, is John Hattie has worked with different people to also create books about what does visible learning look like in specific content areas for grade bands. So like there's a, what does visible learning look like for high school grades 9 to 12? So if you want to learn more about visible learning in your own content area, they may be worth getting a look at.
Sounds great. These are just some upcoming webinars that we have. This one's actually, we just did that one late last week. So we have some PLC series webinars that are still up and coming. All of these webinars are recorded. So if anything, if you're interested in any of them, you can go back and review the recording that's already there and move on to the next. But PLC has been a really big topic for a lot of folks, and looking at data to help us inform instruction. So if you're interested in that, we've got those webinars coming up. When you get off of this webinar, you will, a quick 4-question survey will pop up. We're always looking for feedback for real. We look at it and we try to make any adjustments or changes that we can. It also gives us an understanding of which parts of our webinars people are really excited about and that we might want to be able to just spread the word a little bit more on. So please give us your feedback. And then here are the contacts. Again, I'm Heather Jenkins. I am sort of the math person at Demonstrated Success. Timmy Hilton, who is not necessarily on this webinar, is our ELA person at Demonstrated Success. And then again, Annie Wallace is your math person at the state, and Jenny Cavallari is your ELA person at the state. For you,
yes, Heather, I just wanted to say, please feel free to reach out to us for anything that we can do to help support you further in your teaching.
Sounds great. And then for you science folks, there is an open position at the state for science. They are really have been actively looking for a representative for a while. It's a hard job to fill because it's K to 12, but know that they are looking so that they can find somebody to be able to help all you science folks out there as well. So there's that. All right. I don't see any more questions. I see a couple of thank yous and all of that. So we really do appreciate you attending. We know that your time is super valuable and it's tricky on an afternoon after you've taught all day. So thank you so much for coming. Again, if you have any questions or anything you need, feel free to reach out to any of us, and hopefully we will have you be part of a webinar sometime in the near future. Again, I see somebody trying to raise their hand. We can't really do that during the this particular webinar, but if you have anything that you want to put in there, we'll stay on for another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll sign off. Okay, looks like we're good to go. Thanks, everybody. Take care.